Good evening, everyone. I'll call this Committee of Adjustment hearing to order. Just before we get started this evening, I'll go through the committee's protocols for the hearings this evening. There are 3 applications for 3 different properties that we'll be hearing tonight. A couple of housekeeping rules before we get started. If those are in attendance, if you have cell phones, if you could please turn them off or place them on silent mode. Also, when coming up, if you're coming up to ask any questions, please address your question through the chair and not directly to the person that you're asking the question of. The first order of business will be for any committee members to declare any pecuniary interests or conflicts of interest with any of the applications that are on the agenda this evening. A request will be made for any deferrals or withdrawals of applications that are on the agenda. I believe we have at least 1 or 2 applicants that will be coming in via the online method. So I will ask them as well at the start as they come in, just to confirm. Committee Secretary Treasurer will read out each application noted on the agenda with a brief description and staff recommendation. The applicant or the agent for the applicant will then be asked to come forward if they're here. There's a podium on my right, your left if you're in the crowd, to come up, introduce themselves, and be allotted a short overview to add any additional information they wish to add at that time. Members of the committee will then ask the applicant or the agent for the applicant any questions that they might have, followed by members of the public that wish to speak to an application. Members of the public wishing to speak to an application will be asked to come forward, state their name and address for the record, try to limit their comments to 10 minutes, and must present all questions or comments that they have that are pertinent to the application in that time frame. Persons making a presentation will not necessarily be allowed to return again to speak to the same application. Following all comments, the applicant will be afforded some closing comments if desired. The committee will then present a decision in the form of a motion. The motion will be discussed and voted upon. If a vote is tied, a motion will be defeated. New motions will be made until the committee has reached a decision. Notices of decision will only be provided to those persons who leave their name and addresses in writing with the Secretary Treasurer. For those in attendance, there's a sign-in sheet at the back of the room for that purpose. For those viewing online, you can email our Secretary Treasurer, Taya Taraba, at taya.taraba@portcolborne.ca, or you can call and leave a message at 905-228-8124 immediately following the hearing to request the same. Trusting everyone understands the process, I'll ask for those that are in attendance if there's any I'll ask any committee members if they have any conflicts of interest with this evening's applications. No. Eric?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I have a conflict on application A02-25-PC and B04-25-PC. It's an indirect pecuniary interest as the owners are clients of my employer.
Thank you. And I think I seen Gary and Angie shaking their heads no. Still shaking their heads no. And Dave, you're good? So with that, I'll ask if for the ones that are in attendance this evening, if there's any requests for deferrals of application or withdrawals of application this evening. And again, we got 1 or 2 online coming in. Just the first one? Okay, so as the first applicant comes in, I'll just confirm with them when we get started. So that's the protocols for tonight. I will turn it over to the Secretary Treasurer for the first application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the agenda tonight, we have 1 minor variance and 2 consent applications. Notice of the applications were circulated to the public on January 28th. The required agencies received notice of the applications on January 8th. A recommendation report for these applications were prepared by planning staff and made publicly available on February 7th. All correspondence received by February 7th were addressed in the recommendation reports. Those interested can review the recommendation reports online on the city's website or in person at City Hall. Those interested may also contact planning staff in person, by email, or over the phone to obtain a copy of the reports. Accommodations for alternative methods of viewing or retaining the recommendation reports are available upon request. Please note that the zoning bylaw currently in effect is the City of Port Colborne zoning bylaw 6575/30/18 as amended, which will henceforth be referred to as the zoning bylaw. Our first application tonight is minor variance application A02-25PC for the lands municipally known as 179 Mellenby Avenue and 56 to 56.5 Main Street West, located in the downtown commercial zone as established in the zoning bylaw. The owner 1036-7026 Ontario Inc. is requesting relief from the provisions of the zoning bylaw to permit the construction of a new apartment building notwithstanding the following. That a 1 parking space per dwelling unit be permitted, whereas 1.2 parking spaces per dwelling unit are required. Given the right information and recommendation report, planning staff recommend application AO225 PCP granted, as the application is minor in nature, is appropriate for the development of the site, is desirable in compliance with the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw, and is desirable in compliance with the general intent and purpose of the official plan. That concludes correspondence for this application.
Thank you, and I believe the applicant is online, so we'll bring him into the meeting.
I'll just drag him in.
Good evening, Mr.
Good.
Chair.
Good evening. Just before you get started, you don't wish to withdraw or defer your application this evening?
I do not, Mr. Chair.
Very good. The floor is yours if you wish to add anything at this time.
Just to add a little bit of background, we have tried unsuccessfully working with the city for additional parking and the Seaway for additional parking, which was the background intent, if you will, to the bylaw that was adopted when we went into this development. And with that fact in front of us, we're forced with the request that you see before you this evening to go back or revert to the original staff recommendation and our recommendation to have 1 spot per unit, and those to be contained within our site, and that is our intent. So we agree with the staff's recommendation. The Seaway and the city have not indicated that the available parking within the park adjacent to anything is going to happen to it, that it's going away, but just that they could not assign it, if you will, to us to accommodate the extra parking spaces that the intent of the zoning bylaw tried to capture. We additionally tried to work with the city to find available parking on city parcels adjoining the site or neighboring the site across the street, and those two were unavailable and fell short. So again, that's why you find us here this evening.
Thank you. Do any committee members have any questions? Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the applicant, when you say the city, you say that unable to work with the city and the Seaway, can I assume that you're talking about city planning is your contact with respect to the available leased property in Lock 8 Gateway Park and across the road at the Humberston Hall?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, Councillor Bruno. We have been in touch with Economic Development, the CAO. We have met several times, and they in turn, we have had half a dozen correspondences with the Seaway as well. So multiple departments of the city staff, including engineering and planning, and the CAO, as I expressed, and economic development, and have not been able to put the notion of shared parking that would be assigned to us forward successfully.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll have one other question. I may circle back, Mr. Chair. The other one with respect to realize it's very difficult for street parking there anywhere on that site and the neighboring properties. Were you not able to accommodate the 1.25 by reducing the amount of units or height?
Through you, Mr. Chair, an entire redesign of the building has already taken place to accommodate the staff recommended 1 spots per. Going to anything above 1 spot per would not only reduce the feasibility of the entire development, it currently is 2 stories of parking just to achieve, I I believe it's now down to 70 units.
Wow.
So it is drastically reduced. So the feasibility of the project basically hangs in the balance.
So you're saying it would need to be reduced to 70, but
For sure.
you're
Yeah.
still at 100, right?
Nope, we're down to approximately 70 units.
And how many floors is that?
It's still 8 stories by definition within the
Okay.
zoning and the height restrictions, but the first 2 levels will be parking,
Great.
which will
Thank you.
accommodate the required number of spots and the required number of commercial spots. Through you, Mr. Chair, I apologize.
No, that's fine. Thank you. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Angie, did you have a question?
No, actually, I don't. Thank you.
Okay. Dave?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the applicant. You answered one of my questions because on the sketches that we have, I noticed that the parking tally only went up to 74, so I was going to ask what happened to the other 26. That being said, that accounts for every single unit having one car and visitors not having anywhere to park.
That's right.
So without parking on the street, how do you satisfy parking for residents with an extra vehicle and any visitors?
You don't.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're looking to accommodate the number of units with parking, and the visitor parking daytime would happen in the parking spaces within the park or on the street. That is the reality of what we're facing.
So with the parking in the park, I believe that there is a bylaw that says you can't park in a parking lot that is not your parking lot and strictly for the building. And I'll read. If you give me 1 second to pull this up. So when we had our first meeting back last year, and it was talked about working with the Seaway, should the Seaway not be in favor of such an agreement, the applicant will be required to revisit their plans and contain their parking on site. In that scenario, staff would not be supportive of only having, that was 0.5 you were looking for, 0.5 spaces per unit located on the property, and find that 1 parking space per unit is more reasonable for this area. Additionally, staff note that the city zoning bylaw does permit required parking to be located off-site, provided the parking is used solely by individuals using the property that requires the parking lot. So you have to have a parking lot off-site where only the people that are going to the building can park there, which means you either have to own the parking lot or you have to lease it. You can't use a public parking lot as parking.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the staff recommendation nor our application is suggesting that we're using any of the public parking that is available for visitors to the city of Port Colborne or visitors to the building as permanent parking. We're assigning every parking space that is contained within the property for the project and the parcel itself, period. And that is the reality. We are not looking to use off-site parking that we don't own. It was unavailable. And we're not looking to use the park for designated residents of the development.
So again, I ask, where do people with 2 vehicles park a second vehicle?
The reality of the market and what we may do with this property is that the people that will move there will be people who have 1 vehicle.
So you're saying that there won't be any visitors to the building and...
No, I'm not. There won't be any visitors. Visitors are allowed to park in the park. Visitors are allowed to go on a day visit to the park, just like visitors to visit grandma who lives in our development would be able to visit and park in the park and then leave, where grandma or grandpa would still be, they'd have their assigned parking space within the development.
So your visitors to your building cannot park in a public park. That's what the
That's right.
bylaw says that I just read. You have to have a separate parking lot for visitors and people with second vehicles that don't have an assigned spot on the property of the building.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is not staff's interpretation of the bylaw of what you read, nor is it ours. We have to have a unit assigned, a parking space assigned for every unit within our space, which we have done. It's not it makes no mention of visitor parking.
That's right.
Correct. But what I read said you can have off-site parking, but you have to own the off-site parking.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the off-site parking that your reading refers to is if we were able to arrange parking, we would have to own it. That was for additional parking. Or if we were not to provide 2 floors of parking within our site contained, and we wanted to provide, say, 30 spots off-site, we would have to own the land on which those 30 spots were on. So in this instance, what we have done instead, because we have not been able to secure property or a lifelong lease, because we have not been able to do that, we will contain the required parking within our site specifically.
Okay.
I believe you're wrong, but I'll wait for others.
Thank you. Gary?
Yes, to the applicant. Member Elliott asked some of the questions I was going to circle back to, but I would like to add in that discussion, what about PSWs visiting the building? What about delivery trucks that are there to do that? Where do they park?
Through you, Mr. Chair, a delivery vehicle can fit within the building to deliver. If somebody, it depends on what kind of delivery you're speaking of. So it can happen within, garbage removal happens within the building. So a delivery can happen within the building. A PSW worker, I would be considered a visitor. They would park in on-street parking and then attend into the building if a PSW were required at the building, if that is an assumption that we're making.
Well, I guess I'd just say that you've said and we've all agreed there is no on-street parking.
That's right.
I did not say there's not any on-site parking. Someone else did. Through you, Mr. Chair, I apologize again.
Sorry.
Mellon does have some on-street parking, I believe, and it also has the park that is open to visitors.
Okay.
Okay, well, I guess I don't see it that way, but I'll move on if anybody else has something, Mr. Chair.
Angie? Angie?
Thank you. I do actually have some questions around the parking. Through you, to the presenter, has there been any consideration to add a third parking deck?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the financial implications of offering a third parking deck would make the project absolutely unviable.
Okay, thank you. So basically, there's no accommodation being made for visitors or for visiting services by the sounds of it, because, if you travel the area, you'll realize that you may be able to put 4 cars along Mellenby in a safe way, but that's the only way you're going to do it. Otherwise, you're kind of across the street and down a block or two in order to be able to park. So that it's safe to say that there's no accommodation for visitors or visiting services. Is there any opportunity to at least allow for special spots to be reserved, even in maybe daytime hours, for visiting services? Because I am thinking in a sense of paramed and that sort of thing, people coming to assist in health situations. And they do pop up all the time, and with our healthcare system as it is, we're often seeing that kind of home care coming in. So if one of the agencies can't get parking, that means you have a person in the building not being able to get that service, and that can be a pretty dangerous situation. So can you allocate a couple of spots that are just for that purpose only? Because you do have a, I think you said 74 spots, and you got 70 building. So there's four spots sitting there if you're going one per unit, right? Could you do that?
Your chair, I believe the drawing is for 74 units and
Oh,
74
sorry.
parking spaces. And it may very well be the case that we reduce it by another unit or two units to have a PSW or a visiting person space within the parking deck. Um, Again, planning for something that we're assuming somebody needs a PSW spot. If an ambulance were to be called and pull up, they
That's
would pull up
different.
on Moonview Park
Yeah,
just about anywhere they wanted to get somebody a rescue,
yeah, yeah.
same as fire and same as everyone else. So at the end of the day, I think that the staff recommendation and staff have looked at all of these considerations in putting forth a one-to-one unit to uh, parking space ratio, as have we. Um, I can't say that everybody or no one in the building is going to ever need a PSW.
Yeah.
Nor can you say that all of them are, but if
No.
there was one that was needed and two spots were the triggering point to say, yes, we're going to do it. If we have two spots available, then we're an agreeable type of outfit.
Okay, well, I do thank you for that. I'm just thinking that time, effort, and funding into building a building like this, you don't want to make it that it would limit the quality of life for the tenant. You don't want to have that. You want to have a reputation of being a building that somebody actually wants to come and live in because it's got everything they need, and be able to live out their life there as long as they need to do that. So, being able to accommodate healthcare services, I think, is probably pretty important. There are other services as well, but healthcare in particular, I think that's pretty important. So I don't know what you're going to do about that. And I do understand the one space per unit. We're seeing more of that all the time. I don't think it's a good idea, but I understand some of the limitations. But yeah, it's going to be a bit of a problem here because you're going to have an overflow of people coming to that building. Obviously you can accommodate the people who live in the building to an extent, provided they only have one vehicle. Um, but they're going to be limited in the way that they have visitors because I can guarantee you that if they park in that park, that bylaw officer is going to be over there handing out tickets a lot. That's what's going to end up happening because they can't park in the park. The park is for the parking in the park is for people using the park, not visiting a building that's adjacent to it. So that can be a bit of a drawback. So anyway, I do thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. The only thing I want to confirm is that there are 78 spots and
Okay.
74. So that's where
Okay.
that four comes in. Um, and yeah,
Maybe try to get a little creative with those.
our officer will show up on site and know whether the person is walking in the park or using the park for temporary.
They'll get reported. They'll get reported by people. That happens all the time.
Gotcha.
So yeah, just so you know that does happen.
Yeah.
So it's a reality. Thank you.
Gary?
Mr. Fisher rightfully pointed out the difficulty of obtaining city property or Seaway property or property leased by both, and I feel for you there. Um, you've reduced the number of units to try and accommodate the some better parking situations, but I haven't heard whether it's behind Hummerston Hall on Mellenby or across the street off-site where there are some houses, the ability to either purchase other property adjacent across the road, which allows you to bring up the parking, but also allows you to bring up the number of units. To me, I don't know if you've tried that avenue on those 4 or 5 houses across the road, the tire place on the corner, and in behind Humberston Hall.
Through you, Mr. Chair, without uh, disclosing certain uh, things that shouldn't be disclosed, um, we believe, and I can assure Councillor Bruno, and I believe he knows me well enough, that We are at this stage because we have tried everything that it was feasible. I did not want to go to a second level of parking because the transfer slab and the fire separations are hugely expensive. I would leave it to say that if that is the presentation that we're making to you this evening, it is for those reasons that it is what makes this project still viable. And I guess I would leave it at that. It is both, it is structurally feasible and financially feasible, or more feasible to do what we're proposing and have worked with staff to present to you this evening than it is to go down the other road, because the Seaway and the city-owned properties, of which we have asked for everyone that fits within the bylaw range of, I think it's 50 meters, we have asked for a prospectus on anything that we could use. And staff have been amazing to work with and try to find us properties and to work through it. There's nothing that provides the number of spaces required within the space or the area that's available or that's not already being used for other means. And that leads us to where we are this evening.
Good enough.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm not trying to coerce you to buy properties across the road or behind Humberston Hall. I'm just pointing out if that's an alternative, because I guess, while it might not be the purview here, I just think there are possibilities around there, but perhaps economically the price is too high. But I didn't think it was to accommodate just 1.25. It was more to accommodate more units, which allows you to make those kind of investments. But I hear you. I just wanted to clarify what I was saying. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Since everyone else has had their chance, the only question I have is, I noticed on the parking layout there's 6 designated handicap spots. Those 6 spots, are they included as the 1 per unit spots? I guess where I'm going with that is that if, for instance, you fill your entire building and no one requires a handicap spot or has a handicap plate or permit, then you've basically isolated off 6 additional spots that your residents can't use. So now you're going to be short. Now, if you have some residents that have a handicap spot, that's great. They get the preference, but you say you have 78 spots for 74 units. Is that correct? So you have
Yes, that is correct.
So you have 4 floaters.
And for you, Mr. Chair, off the top of my head, perhaps staff could assist me. I don't recall what the ratio of required handicap spots are, but I believe part of the design is that you wouldn't be able to fit an extra parking spot within the confines of the irregularly shaped lot. And so you may as well have a handicapped access spot. I may be wrong, but I believe so. And if not, I'm sure that my cohorts will text me and tell me, Stephen, no, that's not correct.
So you're saying the 6 may actually be more than what's required?
The 6, through you, Mr. Chair, yes, the 6 spots may be more than what's required for 74 units, because it does seem a little bit high to me. But given the market, there may be a couple of additional spots, but the building shape may also prove that that's the best use of space.
Gotcha. Okay. I think, Angie, you had a question, and then I'll go to Gary.
No, actually, I don't have a question. I was just agreeing.
Okay.
I was nodding my head.
Very good. Gary, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you to the planner, would it not be correct that the number of units is a mathematical calculation that's put in for so many units, so many handicap parking? I don't think you were referring to this, Mr. Chair, but I didn't want it to sound like if they don't have 6 handicapped people there, that somebody else could use the parking spot. So I guess the first question is to staff, how were the six handicap spots? How were they arrived at? Is that something that is a calculation that's preset? Secondly, if it isn't, I would have thought a handicap spot is wider than a regular parking spot. So I'm not sure how the configuration of the building could accommodate 6 handicap spots, but if you only needed 4, you could have 76 regulars instead of 74. So perhaps you could add some clarity for both the applicant and ourselves on how the handicap was arrived at.
Through the chair to Member Bruno, thank you for your question. You're correct. These are, obviously part of our zoning bylaw. So section 3.3 provides for how many accessible parking spaces are required. The previous plan with the 101 dwelling units would have required 6 accessible parking spaces. But now that we've confirmed, dropped down to that to 74, you'd said, that would actually put your required number of accessible parking spaces down to 3. So from 51 to 75 units there, then you would have, number of required standard parking spaces from, if you need 74 parking spaces, then you would need 3 accessible parking spaces. All right, does that make sense?
Gary?
So I guess I'm concerned that either the applicants in downsizing wasn't aware of that, and that if they were, why wouldn't they put the 74 units as now 3 additional units, which could change the ratio to, I don't know, 1.1 or 1.05. Perhaps the applicant could answer that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll say quite simply from an architectural standpoint, which I know that Councillor Bruno will appreciate. They've basically copied the 2 floors because where those parking spots are fit the accessible spaces best. It won't change the ratio by such a significant amount that the rounding that is being asked for, the non-rounding, the 1-to-1 ratio, it would be less than 1.05. And so it wouldn't have a significant impact on what's being asked for in this application. In practicality, if it was deemed marketable or the staff during site plan agreed that we only needed the 3, then that's fine. If market dictated we needed 6, then we have the capacity and the space for the 6 based on duplicating the 2 floors. It's not for lack of knowing. As we are now, 78 for 74, we're just at about 1.0405. I think if we round up, if we converted those 3, if we can, I'd have to look at the layout to see if those 3 can become 4 spaces. Does it become 1.05? That's something to consider, Mr. Chair. But I think fundamentally, at the end of the day, we will use every space and area within the 2 floors of parking to create as much parking as we possibly can. But we're in front of the committee this evening to deal with the staff recommendation and our request for 1-to-1 as the minimum. And we will use every space possible to put as many parking spaces that are needed and that will make the project successful as was noted this evening.
I guess just
Thank you for that.
I guess the reason I bring that up is one of my colleagues here was concerned about visitor parking. Those additional spots then could be designated as visitor parking, or if you do have a tenant that has 2 vehicles, then maybe one of those gets assigned to them as their extra parking spot. At least it gives you a little bit of flexibility with regards to those additional vehicles or visitors or maybe a delivery spot. It looks like there's a fairly significant area in the middle. You could probably paint the square and say delivery vehicle parks here, sort of thing. So that's where I was going with it. I wasn't exactly sure how many handicap spots were required. I'm not saying certainly reduce them, but I'm just trying to come up with some extra options here to address some of the concerns of my colleagues here with regards to visitor parking and additional parking that may be required that aren't tenant related to the property.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can assure you, no one thought you were suggesting that we take away accessible parking. And I do applaud your idea for the what you call the delivery spot, because it is very popular, and I take this tongue in cheek. It's very popular for people who don't have cars, who don't actually need a parking spot, who may occupy this building and have zero cars,
That's right.
which then would allow for the people that have two cars. And that's why this notion, or this instance, and I know one-to-one is difficult sometimes to fathom in Port Colborne, and everywhere else it's even half a spot in Toronto. But because some people just don't have cars, some people do use dish delivery services, et cetera, et cetera. And it's an ever-changing and evolving world when it comes to transportation and parking needs. And maybe we'll be the first building that does one-to-one successfully with only 4 or 6 extra spots. But those are the realities. And I think establishing the minimum of one-to-one is what we're asking for. And a delivery spot is important, and so are PSW spots. And while we may only have a couple, I think it's recommendable. It's approvable, at least from where I sit and from what we're seeing out in the market and what's changing in terms of what people need, what people do drive on a daily basis, and where they decide to live, knowing that there's only one spot available to them. It's a market decision. It's not what we have always been used to or anticipate when we go to move into our home or our condo or our apartment. And so those people that decide to live in our building, in the beautiful town, city of Port Colborne, will know that they only get one spot.
All right, very good. There's no other questions. Do we have anyone online? No. Is there any members of the public that wish to speak to this application this evening? Sir, if you could just come up to the podium on the right. There's a gray bar with a red button in the middle. Just your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to about 10 minutes if possible.
Oh, yeah, no, I just have a second. My name is Gino Stinziani. I'm at 2591 Fire Lane number 3 in Port Colborne. The applicant just made a comment to the effect that, it's one-to-one, which is fine, and chances are that not everybody will have a spot, or not everybody will need a spot. But if there are visitors, unless those spaces are designated as visitor spaces and clearly designated as such, nobody's going to be able to use them, or if they do use them, they won't be using them in the way that it should. And when visitors come and they come into the building and they don't see that there's a place to park, it kind of defeats the purpose. If there's 74 apartments, there's going to be visitors regularly, whether they're coming in to say hi to their aunt or whether they're a PSW or whatever there are. People are going to come. They need a place to park. You can't just have them park in the park or on the street or somewhere in the neighborhood. So I appreciate that the numbers don't make sense financially if they can't fit one-to-one, but there has to be visitor spots. You can't have a building and no visitor spots. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak to this application this evening? Not seeing any. Is there any final comments that you wish to have as the applicant?
No, Mr. Chair, I say no, but then I start talking. Again, we support staff's recommendation, and I assure you that we will do everything to make sure that we have as many spots as possible that are usable, and work with staff to make sure that we have a functioning building. And I mean, I know that have family live in Ottawa and other areas of Ontario, you know, sometimes not everyone has a car, and you know, that spot that's reserved for their unit becomes their visitor spot, and there's so many different variations on parking. Um, and it's a new reality in terms of where we're going in terms of transportation and parking and requirements. And we need houses, uh, as you all know, and that's what we're trying to put forward, the best and most feasible uh, development so that we can get it built, provide housing in a really cool spot, I must say. And that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your consideration in committee.
Thank you. With that, does anyone have a recommendation? All right, not seeing that anyone has one. I'll move application AO225PC with the lands legally known as Plan 25, Lot 45, New Plan 784 in the city of Port Colborne, located in downtown commercial DC zone, municipally known as 179 Melby Avenue and 56 Main Street, that the application AO225PC be granted for the following reasons. That is minor in nature, it is appropriate for the development on site, it is desirable and in compliance with the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw, and is desirable and in compliance with the general intent and purpose of the official plan. Can I get a seconder to put it on the floor? Angie? Questions or comments? All those in favor? That'll be granted. Thank you.
Just as
Thank you for your time, Mr. Chair, Mr. and committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave?
just to be noted on the record, the only reason I supported this is because this will get overturned if we turn this down. And I can't relate how mad I am at the way that planning, not planning department, but planning is going. Cities have no control over what happens in their city. And that is unfortunate. I've said right from the beginning, this building is in the wrong place. It's too small of a lot. There's no parking adjacent to it. There's no on-street parking. You can't park in the park. So it doesn't fit the surrounding areas, the size of it. And I just want to be noted that, yes, while I vote for it, I'm totally against it. And I don't want to go to the tribunal and have this overturned and saddle the city with thousands of dollars because the tribunal will say, yep, satisfies planning, you're good to go. Well, sometimes it doesn't. And for those of us that live in the city and know what's coming with this, it's nice to be heard sometimes, even if you don't get your way. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, the next application, please.
Our next application is consent application BO325PC for the lands municipally known as 2790 Highway 3 in the Hamlet Commercial Zone as established in the zoning bylaw. The agent Carol Moraziuk, on behalf of the owners Francis and Paula Sneak, requesting the committee's consent to sever for the purpose of merging two commercial lots. The subject parcels are shown as parts 1 and 2 in the proposed sketch, where part 2 is to be retained for an existing commercial use and part 1 is to be merged for an existing commercial use. Given the recommendation report, planning staff recommend that the respective consent application be granted, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report dated February 7th, 2025. That concludes correspondence for this application.
Thank you. Is the applicant or the agent for the applicant here? Again, there's a little red button on that gray bar on the top of the desk there. And if anything you'd like to add at this time, please feel free.
It's just a simple boundary adjustment, Mr. Chair, to clear up. There's a parking lot and a laneway access, and they just want to put that legally on title with the mill. That's about it.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Eric?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Just looking at the sketch, to me, it's not exactly clear, like where it's merging with. So part 1, I don't see a part 3. is it just merging with that? I don't know, it seems like maybe a slightly bolder dotted, not dotted, but dashed line.
Through Mr. Chair, if you can see on the sketch, there's an arrow pointing lands to be merged, and it is onto the adjoining parcel. It's not required that I show the area and everything of it, but it's the mill. Nothing's changing out their land use. It's just clearing up some title stuff. That's all. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Eric, if you're looking at the picture, so that little sliver called Part 1 is just going to be now part of the parcel to the left of it.
I guess through you, I just don't know what encompasses that parcel to the left of it. Like, I don't know how much of it. Like, does it include that Part 1 Plan 59R4916 concession part? Like, I just don't know exactly what it is, but it doesn't really seem to matter. Just want clarity.
Sorry, so that part, marked Part 1, which has, I don't know what the frontage is, but it's 188 deep. It's just cut that little triangle off, and it's going to merge with the parcel on the left, which is also commercial. Maybe the applicant can try to explain a little bit better.
Through Mr. Chair, yes, that part, that is a piece of the part, because it's been acquired through different means over time. So that reference plan, that Part 1 on Plan 59 are, hang on, I can't see, 4916 is part of the mill's property that they have on White Road as well. But they're not doing any land use changes currently. It's just cleaning up. There's a parking lot where they sell their Mennonite sheds from, and a laneway for access along the greenhouse.
Any other questions? Gary?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is an oddity. It's not to the presenter, and I'm for the applicant's request. But I did notice in reading most of these files tonight, and I believe it was the sneak one that I first caught it on, as in our decisions and the conditions, it talks about a $400 fee being paid for. But the application had a lower amount, and I was wondering if the planning department could comment. Did those fees go up? Because on their application, I think it says $240, and I didn't know if the fees changed on January 1st, but the application was in December. Perhaps I could get some clarity, but I felt it was easier to ask now than once we're reading the recommendation.
Through the chair to Member Bruno, it's a good question. So the final certification fee did go up as part of our regular rates and fees bylaw that gets passed every year. So this application would have come in before 2025. So December 2024, I believe, is when it was submitted. So the final certification fee that was noted there on the application form, that page 1, would have been the 2024 fees. So now that we're in 2025, when this recommendation came forward, we did include that the 2025 fee, but if the committee would rather, amend the motion there to charge 2024, that is up to your discretion.
Gary?
I guess if I could, when we've had DC charges or building permit charges, or when we're going to do short-term rentals, it is usually when the people registered the application that we gave them the benefit of the fee at the time they applied, because that's what they read and they did apply before the change. So I would be for reducing the fee to the time of their application. There's been no delay by them, and I think that's only fair.
Thank you. Just as a point of clarity with regards to fees, I know the majority of the members are councillors, but the committee does not have the prerogative of doing anything with fees. We can change it to 240, and if staff's, I agree with you, they started the application, these were the rules when they started the application, and I agree with you as far as that goes, so I guess we're not waiving the fee, we're just asking for clarification, but just as a point of, I guess, order of the committee is that we don't technically have any jurisdiction over fees, but I'm good with the 240 as you're recommending with that, Gary. Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. I do remember when that was changed, and I do agree with the change. So I think I'll have to rely on planning department to resolve that with internally, and appreciate that direct response from our planner, and I would support it, but as well. But if we don't have the power to do so, one would hope that internally there would be something that if it had to go to council to do that, that so be it. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no online for this, right? Is there any members of the public that wish to speak to this application? Not seeing any. Gary, would you be so inclined to move it?
Sure, Mr. Chair. With respect to application B03-25PC, known as concession 2 part lots 13 and 14 in the city of Port Colborne, located in the Hamlet Commercial HMC zone, that application B03-25PC be granted. One, that the applicant provides the Secretary Treasurer with deeds for the conveyance of subject parcel or a registrable legal description of the subject parcel, and a copy of the deposited reference plan for use and insurance of the certificate of consent, and a final certification fee of, we'll leave it to staff, $400 or $200 payable to the city of Port Colborne, submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. That 3, that a drainage apportionment agreement be completed by the city's drainage superintendent or by an approved engineer at the cost of the applicant. Copy of the deposited plan must be delivered to the drainage superintendent through the planning department for the apportionment agreement to be completed. 4, that all conditions of consent be completed by February 12, 2027. To the planner, do I have to read the reason?
No, you're good.
Okay, thank you.
Can I get a seconder to that? Dave? Questions or comments? All those in favor? That'll be carried. There's a 20-day waiting period, but other than that. Okay. Oh. All right. Madam Secretary. Oh, yeah, you can stay there. Madam Secretary, the next application, please.
Our last application is consent application B0425PC for the lands municipally known as 153 Kent Street in the 4th Density Residential Zone as established in the zoning bylaw. The agent Carol Morziuk, on behalf of the owner, Michael Smith, are requesting the committee's consent to sever for the purpose of merging 2 lots. Subject parcels are shown as parts 1 and 2 in the proposed sketch, which part 2 contains a dwelling, is proposed to be merged with part 1, which contains 2 accessory structures for residential use. Given the recommendation report, planning staff recommend that prospective consent application be granted subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report dated February 7th, 2025. That concludes correspondence for this application.
Thank you. And the applicant's already at the podium ready to go. Is there anything further you'd like to add at this time?
Through Mr. Chair, this is just a boundary adjustment. The suites on Elm, the Sanctuary Suites, they use the garage they store the lawnmowers, stuff like that. Michael Smith has actually sold the house already, so he wants to keep the garage with the church or this apartment. I always call it a church. And yeah, it's just a simple little boundary adjustment. No uses are changing. That's about all.
Very good, thank you. Any questions of the applicant, Gary?
I guess I would ask this through the planning department. We're not party to if disclosure hasn't been given to the buyer of the house that we're doing this after the fact, now that we have knowledge that it's sold. I don't even know if the agent can speak to that, but I'm just wondering if planning has an opinion on us doing this, given what was just before stated.
Through the chair to the member, I mean, it is a private property sale, so hopefully all was well and good and during that sale, but yeah, we would not be privy to those documents unless they were shared with us.
Can the agent comment on that?
Through Mr. Chair, I have no I didn't know that it was sold until we put the sign up for posting. So it's private sale. I just act as agent on the, the planning part of it for the boundary adjustment, and that's about it. I'm sorry. I wish I could, that's about all.
All right, thank you.
The only thing I guess I would ask is that currently Michael Smith is the owner of that entire parcel. It's not been sold yet. Is that correct? Okay. So that's the most important part. He's currently the legal owner of that entire parcel. So he has the legal authority to ask for the severance.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Great.
So I think that's really anything past that would be a civil matter out of our jurisdiction. So with that, if there's any members of the public who wish to speak to this one, not seeing any. Any other questions or comments? I get a mover.
No, I'm just kind of thinking, would have been cheaper for Michael to build a few sheds and stuff.
Angie?
Yep, thank you. Application B0425 PC, Plan 16, Lot 365, New Plan 854 in the City of Port Colborne, located in the 4th Density R4 zone. B0425 PC be granted subject to the following conditions. Oh, it's not highlighted, so I guess I'm not reading it, or?
No, you're good. It's there. They're the standard conditions, unless you wanted to change 2 to 240. I don't know. Did this one start before? I did. This one started before the end of the year.
Okay, so we can do that. Then I would like to do that. So it would be 240. So item 2, that a final certification fee of 240. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
That was the amount. Yeah, payable to the City of Port Colborne and submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. Otherwise, everything remains the same.
Very good. Thank you. Can I get a seconder to that? Dave, questions or comments? All those in favor? Will be carried. Thank you. And see you then. Is there any?
He's a friend of mine. That's why I said it would have been cheaper for him to build.
Well, no, you know how expensive it is to build another. It's the garage.
Is there?
Yeah.
It's the garage that.
We still need to finish off here. Is there any other business? Nobody's got any other business? Can I get a mover and a seconder for the January 15th, 2025 Committee of Adjustment meeting minutes? Gary, Angie, questions or comments? All those in favor? That'll be carried. And we're adjourned. Thank you.